One of the most evil regimes seen in world history was the Nazis, and Hitler sought to build a new empire that he hoped would span continents. But during the Second World War, he would make a series of mistakes that would lead to the Germans and the Nazis ultimately losing the conflict, and inside of his bunker in Berlin, Hitler would finally concede that the war was lost. He was surrounded during his time in power by a number of incredibly powerful men, whose names today have gone down in history for their evil and links to war crimes and the horrors of the concentration camps. But alongside these men were a number of women who stood by their husbands, and a number of wives of the senior Nazis were more ardent and staunch supporters of Hitler than their husbands were. Many were loved by Hitler, including the wife of Joseph Goebbels, and the couple were even given marriage counselling and advice from the dictator of Nazi Germany. But who were the wives of the senior Nazis, and what happened to them at the end of the Second World War? Join us today to find out, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Despite having little power inside of the Nazi hierarchy herself, Ava Brown was a long-time companion and brief wife of Adolf Hitler. Ava met Hitler when she was just 17, and she worked as an assistant and also a model for his personal photographer, and Hitler was infatuated. At the time, he had a rather bizarre history of relationships, including being romantically linked to his niece, but Ava Brown would win out over her. Hitler lived with his half-niece Gaily Raubal, but she died suspiciously from a gunshot wound sustained from Hitler's own pistol. But it's believed that Hitler's fledgling relationship with Brown may have led to Gaily Raubal's death. Ava Brown would also attempt to take her own life twice, as she shot herself with her father's pistol, and many historians have claimed that this was not serious and was a plea for more attention from Hitler. But following this, the pair became more committed, but she would try to end her life after Hitler could not make time for her. She was much in the shadow of her boyfriend whilst he was in power, and she was never allowed to stay in the room when important political conversations occurred. During the war, she would never be involved in Hitler's war cabinet meetings, but she remained almost in secret, to the point that thousands of Germans would never know that she was involved in a relationship with the dictator. She enjoyed a lot of time at Hitler's mountain retreat at Obersalzberg, known as a Berghof, and she hosted many parties there. It was said in the evenings that she and Hitler had interconnecting doors at the Berghof, and that Hitler spent most of his evenings working alone in his study, and then the pair would retire to bed. Ava would spend the evenings drinking wine in her dressing gown or housecoat, and the couple would never display affection towards each other. She remained by the side of her man until the very end of the Second World War in Europe, and she was rewarded by marrying Hitler in the evening of the 29th of April 1945, and this was witnessed by Goebbels and Martin Bormann. But around 1 p.m. on the 30th of April 1945, along with Hitler, Ava Brown bid farewell to the remaining members of the inner circle inside of the bunker, and also the staff of the Führer bunker. At 3:30 p.m. a loud gunshot was heard, and Hitler's valet and adjutant entered the study and found Ava Brown and Hitler slumped on a sofa, and Ava had bit down on a cyanide capsule, and the inside of the office smelled like burned almonds that emanated around. Heinrich Himmler became the second most powerful person inside of Nazi Germany as the head of the SS, and it's believed that many SS members were more loyal to Himmler than the actual dictator. He met his wife Marguerite Boden in 1927, and she was 7 years older than him. Marguerite was a nurse who owned a small private clinic. The pair met during one of his lecture tours, and they wrote to each other. But Marguerite was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed nurse, and she was Himmler's ideal woman. The couple lived a life in a sense which was very Nazified, and Marguerite would listen to her husband's rants, and she too was very anti-Semitic. The couple married in July 1928, and none of Himmler's family attended the wedding. They did have one child, a daughter named Gudrun, and they were also foster parents to a boy that later became an SS officer. Himmler was always busy, so his wife took charge of their farm and business to raise livestock. She was described as an exemplary housewife who devoted herself to her husband, and she stayed loyal to him. But during his rise to power, their relationship suffered, and the couple united for social occasions, but Heinrich Himmler would stray. He had a mistress named Hedwig Pothast, and she would father two of Himmler's children. Hedwig would see Himmler when he wasn't busy, which was times which were very few and far between, and it's not known how much she knew about Himmler's work in the SS and what was happening inside of the concentration camps. She would learn about Himmler's death on the radio, and she then went into hiding, but was arrested by the US Army and was interrogated in Munich. But she remained in close contact with Himmler's older brother and his close confidants. However, Himmler's mistress died in 1994 at the age of 82, and she remained quiet about Himmler's responsibility for the huge crimes. But his wife, Marguerite, would have a more hands-on role during World War II, as despite being separated, she helped to run a German Red Cross hospital. She remained anti-Semitic and a staunch Nazi, and then she reached the rank of colonel in the German Red Cross, and she said of her husband, "How wonderful that he has been called to great tasks and is equal to them. The whole of Germany is looking to him." In 1945 she went on the run, but was arrested and was interrogated, but it was clear she didn't know too much about her husband's activity. She was considered a lesser offender according to denazification, and she was not considered accountable for the crimes of her husband. Her final years were spent in Munich in an apartment, and she had been stripped of her right to vote, and also her right to claim a pension, and Marguerite Himmler died in 1967 at the age of 73. Hermann Goering, the flamboyant Reich Marshal and head of the Luftwaffe, was married twice. His first wife, Karin Goering, was Swedish, and they married in 1923. They lived in a house in the suburbs of Munich, and she cared for him following his injuries in the wake of the failed beer hall putsch. The couple travelled Germany together to further the Nazi cause. However, Karin suffered from tuberculosis. In September 1931, her mother died, and Karin travelled to Sweden to attend the funeral, but she had a huge heart attack the following day and died of heart failure on the 17th of October 1931. Her death had a huge effect on Goering, and he built a hunting lodge named after her. But Hermann's second wife was Emmy Goering, who became known as the First Lady of the Third Reich, and she was Hitler's hostess at many state functions and important meetings. Her and Goering married in 1935, and together they had a daughter, Edda. Emmy Goering's relationship with Hitler attracted criticism and animosity from Ava Brown, who Emmy greatly disliked. Hitler was known for bellowing at Goering for his wife to have more respect for Ava, but she was a prominent public figure. Goering himself was one of the richest men in Europe, and Emmy was part of this, and she lived in mansions and castles with the walls adorned with stolen artwork. At the end of the war, her husband was placed on trial, and Goering would later escape the hangman's noose, but Emmy Goering was sentenced to a year in jail for being a staunch Nazi. She had 30% of her property confiscated also, and she spent the rest of her life in a small flat in Munich before she died at the age of 80 in 1973. The love life of Joseph Goebbels was tumultuous and shocking, and despite being married to Magda, a woman who was considered Hitler's best friend, he would have a number of mistresses, many of whom were high-profile actresses. Magda Goebbels, his wife, had previously been married to a rich industrialist who was twice her age, but in 1930 she attended a Nazi meeting, and she was impressed by the speaker Joseph Goebbels, who was a Gauleiter of Berlin. She joined the Nazi party, and then the couple became involved with each other on a trip to Weimar in 1931. Magda was a staunch Nazi herself, and she was an ambitious woman who wanted to be at the very top of the Nazi party. She had a close relationship with Hitler, and she would work for him, writing and receiving letters from women inside of Germany, and she would consult on these problems. But as mentioned, her husband had many affairs throughout their marriage, and one woman, a Czech actress named Lena Barova, almost took Joseph away from her. Magda spoke to Hitler about this, and Hitler was not happy about one of his closest friends and top ministers having a scandalous affair that would be all over the newspapers. Hitler insisted that they stayed together, but Magda would also have a number of affairs herself. During the Second World War, Magda in quiet would believe that the war was not going well for Germany, and she would, in secret, criticise Hitler. But she remained devoted to him. She was not a well woman, but as the Soviets entered Berlin, the Goebbels family took up residence in the Führer bunker. It was clear that Magda had no intention of living out the war, and she would kill her children inside the bunker shortly after Hitler's death. She had rejected offers to smuggle her children out of the bunker, but she made the decision to kill them. But then, shortly after, with her husband, they died by their own hands inside the garden of the Reich Chancellery, and Magda consumed cyanide and was then given a coup de grace afterwards. Described as a butcher of Prague, Reinhard Heydrich's involvement in the Second World War and the SS saw thousands of people killed and executed. He was a brute of a man who ordered large-scale executions to pacify the population he was overseeing. He was seen by Hitler and Himmler as the ideal Aryan. His wife was Lena Heitrick, who joined the Nazi Party in 1929, and the two would marry in 1931, and they had 4 children. It was Lena who convinced her husband to take up a position in the SS, and she packed his suitcase for his interview with Himmler. Heydrich would be killed by SOE-trained assassins in Prague in 1942, and following his death, Lena was given the country estate of Jungfern-Braschau by Hitler. On her estate, Lena kept a number of prisoners of war working in forced labour conditions. As the Second World War came to an end, she was allowed to receive a pension, and she got a rather large sum because her husband had been involved in the German police when killed. They had previously refused to pay this, but in Czechoslovakia she was tried in absentia and was sentenced to life in prison as the wife of the butcher of Prague. She remarried and operated her husband's former summer house as a restaurant until it burned down, and she died in 1985. Hitler's private secretary Martin Bormann attracted a huge amount of hate and criticism from other members of his inner circle. He would control access to Hitler and often had the ear of him, and turned the dictator against specific members of the inner circle. He was seen as a key organiser, was involved in the chancellery, and he was a brutal man himself. He was responsible for thousands of deaths, and what specifically happened to Bormann is not completely clear today. In 1929, Martin Bormann married Gerda Busch, and their marriage would produce 10 children. Hitler would regularly attend the home of Gerda's father, and it was here where the couple met. At their wedding, Rudolf Hess and Hitler acted as witnesses, but Bormann would also, like Goebbels, have a number of mistresses. Gerda and her children would be in Hitler's Berghof region at the end of the war, and in April 1945 they fled following an Allied air attack for Italy. They made it to Italy, but within a year Gerda had died from cancer. The Bormann children were then cared for in foster homes. Rudolf Hess was appointed the Deputy Führer to Adolf Hitler in 1933, and he held this position until he flew on an alleged peace mission to Scotland to negotiate the British exit from the Second World War. Hess would later be tried at Nuremberg, and he was considered the last Nazi remaining in Spandau Prison until 1987. But he was married to a lady named Ilsa. Ilsa met Hess in April 1920 in Munich, and she studied at university there, and she was a very early member of the Nazi Party. Hess was hesitant to enter a relationship with Ilsa, but it was her who introduced Hess to Hitler. But Hitler was the one who told Hess to marry, and the couple did marry in December 1927. They had one child named Wolf, and Hitler was the boy's godfather, but following his flight to Scotland, Ilsa left Munich to live with her son in a small Bavarian village. As she was the wife of a prominent Nazi, she was arrested and interrogated, but was held for around 9 months before she was released. She remained loyal to Hitler until her death, and remained a Nazi until her final days in 1995. The women of the Nazi Party and the wives of the high-ranking members played an important role in the lives of their husbands, but many of them remained loyal to the Nazi cause until their final days, long after their husbands had died or had been executed for their war crimes. Some lived out their lives in obscurity and quiet, but others would make shocking statements to the media. They were sometimes considered the forgotten women of the Second World War, and the wives of the top-ranking Nazis are very varied, but also rather captivating. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.